wanted their program to be cooperative with the other community banks, and they actually wind up bringing them net additional business to what they currently do now, principally because they know how to handle certain key complex, especially economic development projects, which those local community banks typically don't know how to handle. So all the way around, it's turned out to be a win-win by everybody, and that is certainly a model that we think is one that needs to be added to the equation to the approach that Ellen's been advocating.
Well, thank you. Can you hold right there? Dr. Khavari, are you there? Can we open up the bridge for Dr. Khavari?
Yes.
I wanted to ask you if you have any input at this time. We've had you in the quietude mode for a while, and I wanted to know if you have any input at this time before we go on with the show. We have only 30 minutes left.
No, pretty much everybody said what it should be said, so that's fine.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being here. We're going to continue with Web of Debt, and also, Jim, thank you for being here. You're welcome to stay on the bridge as we continue the show. I think that there's some aspects of the book that we should start to get into even deeper, unless there's some things that you want to address now. I'd like to know, why did you write this book? What moved you to write the book? Why did you do this? This is a huge
This is actually my 11th book, and of course I was a lawyer before I was a writer. I always wanted to be a writer. I just couldn't support myself as writing, so I went to law school and did commercial law. So I actually know about the UCC and that sort of thing.
Talk about the UCC real quickly. What it is? It's the Uniform
Commercial Code, and so it's basically contracts. But my argument would be that all money today is legal agreements, and that's why you should have a public agency overseeing it in the same way that you have a public court system. You would not want a private court system. If you're going to go have somebody overseeing the deal and making sure that all the parties play fair and stuff, which is what you need this middleman for, you want it to be a public entity that's accountable to the public and not gouging you and taking, all the profits they can manage to get out of the deal out of it and not reporting what's going on, which is what we have going on now. So anyway, I worked for 10 years as a lawyer. My ex-husband burned out on Beverly Hills Law and decided he wanted to go in the Foreign Service. So we were abroad for 11 years. He worked for USAID, and that gave me a chance to write. So I wrote 10 books on health, and I got into...
Name some of your books.
We had one bestseller. I had a co-author in this one, Lynn Walker, and she's a pharmacist and has many other titles. And it sold 285,000 copies, and it was called Nature's Pharmacy. So what we did was we went through 160 diseases, and we said what the disease was, what the conventional remedy, what's really going on with this disease, not just the name of it, but what's really happening in your body, what the conventional remedy is, basically, in most cases, why you don't want to take this conventional remedy, why it's actually bad for you. It's a drug, and it's toxic normally, and it's blocking. Most drugs act to suppress symptoms. Well, the symptom is your body's attempt to work out the problem, like diarrhea, sneezing, coughing, all that stuff is your body trying to cleanse. So if you suppress those symptoms, you have suppressed the healing mechanism of your body. So our whole contention would be that only the body can heal. And if you're going to get in the way of what the body's doing, you're actually doing more harm than good. So what you want to find out is what remedies help the body to do what it does. So we largely wrote about things like homeopathy, which stimulates the body to do what it's trying to do, and just basic natural herbal type things.
But what got you to this book?
Okay, so then when we were in the Foreign Service, I wound up representing. I represented several alternative healers, but the big one was Jimmy Keller, who was a cancer therapist in Tijuana, and he was like one of the most popular people down there. And he was kidnapped by the FBI, taken to Brownsville, Texas, and tried for fraud, the alleged fraud of representing that he had a cancer cure, which I thought he did because I had talked to all his patients. And I worked on the suit, and I also did a lot of interviewing, and it went on for years. He actually wound up spending total 3.5 years in jail he'd spent 2 years in jail, and then when he got out, he was on probation in Louisiana, and all his old patients came to him and said they were going to die if he didn't treat them, et cetera. And so he did, of course, in violation of his probation, and so he got busted again and spent another 1.5 years in jail. So through all that, he was actually he knew a lot, and so I learned a lot from him about the whole how things work, how things really work. And one of his supporters was Ed Griffin, who had a movie called World Without Cancer, which linked the drug industry to the bank. The drug people, the banking people, and the oil people are all the same people. So after I read that, I realized that if you really wanted to solve the problem, you have to solve the banking problem, that's where the control comes from.
That's where the action is.
Yeah. So I just, it was so mind-blowing to discover that there is no money in our system. There's only debt in our system, and that it's all created by private banks through a basically fraudulent mechanism. And then I discovered that The Wizard of Oz was written about that. So, at first I thought, well, that's real interesting, but what can I say about it that hasn't already been said? But then I discovered this whole allegory that, of course, I'm a writer first, and I'm really just a writer in search of a good subject. So when
You're a little more than a writer in search of a good subject. Yeah, let's just create a parallel system with our own state centralized banks and issue our own money, and it's all good. I'm just a writer. Go ahead. You're a very good writer, by the way. This was the most thorough book. I've read so many books. I've read Muhammad Yunus's book. I've read James Turk's book. I've read so many books in finance and money, and this was so complete.
Oh, thanks. Well, the thing is, most people who write books on economics are economists, and so they're not real interesting, generally speaking. They just, because they're not trained in how to write. But I've spent my whole life figuring out how to say things in a way that would be engaging, and put a little poetry in it, a little sort of spiritual meaning, and the meaning of life sort of thing. So the philosophy of this whole book is the philosophy of the Wizard of Oz. We've got it all. We can have it all. And abundance is on our feet in the form of the silver slippers, which were changed to ruby slippers in the movie, but they were silver in the book, meaning the silver standard, which meant the money of the people. In other words, we can create our own money. We've been hoodwinked into believing in scarcity when actually we've got it here. The only thing we're lacking is the medium of exchange, and that is merely a series of legal agreements. We can put that all in place.
Stop right there. That's great. So the medium of exchange is the legal agreement. Mm-hmm. That's the instrument. That is the legal. That's the exchange. Mm-hmm. And everything else are what? Mechanisms in which to express that. Is that correct?
Right. Well, it's real obvious when you're talking about a barter system. Like, there are a lot of barter systems that don't involve money at all, or they're just all on the computer. But when you're talking about credit, that's a different thing. When you're paying over time, that's where you need your legal agreement, because you're saying, trust me to pay you out over 5 years. I don't have the money now. Trust me to pay you. I'll pay you a little extra. And so that's where the banker came in, because they really didn't trust each other. They didn't know each other. But they knew this bank, this third party called a bank, that had been in town for a long time. So the bank said, basically, okay, we'll pretend to have the money. We'll lend you the money. We'll write it up into your account as if you have it. And we'll charge you double over the course of your 30-year loan for taking the risk that maybe you won't pay us back, and for, because we're in the business to make money, and that's what we do. So the problem was, because it's an inherently fraudulent system, in other words, they're pretending to have money they don't have. Not only is it bad for us because we can be exploited, which we have been, but it's bad for them, the bankers, because you see what state they're in now. They really don't have the money. So these capital requirements and so forth, they're having trouble meeting, because they're scrambling around trying to pretend they have capital that they don't have, or concealing the fact that their books are messed up. And the reason they got into that whole derivative thing was because what they have created is a Ponzi scheme that requires more and more debtors to be sucked in at the bottom. And now, after 300 years, we've run out of debtors. So they came back and turned on us, and we became the big debtors. And now there's nobody. So they're scrambling around trying to basically indebt each other until, the parasite eventually, what's happened is the parasite has run out of its food source.
So what do you see happening as the G20 met and is announcing the request of the IMF to become the new international central bank? And what do you think about the call for using a super currency from other leaders of other nations to replace the reserve currency? And thirdly, and really complicate this good, if the reserve currency of the U.S. Federal Reserve note is changed, will it still be possible to still form a state bank?
That's a good question. You can certainly envision that that there is an element around the world that's aiming for this whole 1984 scenario where we'll be trapped totally, and then we won't be able to do anything.
It's looking like that right now.
That's why we have to scramble.